Over the last 2 years, there's been a particular white-hot attention on that. And we have Team Anna and now Team Arvind Kejriwal to thank for that. And when I say thank, it is a big thanks, because the attention and indignation that they have brought to it is really something that is worth having, that was timely, and almost a historical necessity. But they have articulated the curse. But was the cleansing wind that they were suggesting the correct approach that a country like ours needs? That itself became a huge topic of debate. The team fell apart, and the curse remains, but the cleansing wind is still not clear. I said it perhaps in the session yesterday with Manish Tiwari that what really is the nature of corruption in our country? I think that has become a slightly foggy idea. There was a time when we understood an exchange of a suitcase full of money. That was corruption that we understood. Today, the nature of corruption is something else altogether. And to help understand that, and to help understand how to combat that, we have two really experienced and interesting speakers. Rajeev Chandrasekhar, who actually can speak from both sides of the fence. He's been an entrepreneur, is an MP, he's been the president of FICCI. There's also Jayaprakash Narayan, who shares his name with a very illustrious man who also fought against corruption. He started the Lok Satta Party and has been thinking very deeply about the issues of corruption. So please welcome Rajeev Chandrasekhar and Jayaprakash Narayan. Thank you. Thank you for being here, both of you. Rajeev, I'd like to start with you and hark back to a conversation we had, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, when, there was a lot of the 2G spectrum scam, the beginnings of these mega scams being exposed. And you spoke about how the nature of crime has changed. The nature of white-collar crime has completely changed. And that, in fact, all our punitive structures are not really geared, one, to understand this, and two, to combat it, and that we need a complete overhaul in our thinking. So could you share with the audience what you meant by that? In what ways has corruption changed?
When we think of corruption in the conventional way, we think of a victim and a perpetrator of a crime. If you look at the 2G spectrum scam or the Colgate scam or the other scam, you will find that there's one common thread. These are all victimless crimes. There is nobody at the other end of this crime that is, let us say, being deprived of anything. And so that is the nature of the scam today, which is that you pick on areas and issues where the let's say the affected party is this amorphous group of people that are the taxpayers and the citizens of the country. That's point number one. Point number two is these are becoming increasingly so sophisticated that it is very difficult for anybody to just make an A and B equals C equals corruption kind of a calculation. So these are sophisticated, and the most important thing, as I see it, is that they tend to get victimless. Because I'll explain to you, at the end of this Colgate discussion in Parliament, a couple of people walked up to me and said, but what is your problem? With 2G spectrum, the consumers still get cheap service. With Colgate, nobody is getting affected. So what really is your problem? Who are the people who are so-called affected by these crimes? And therein is the let's say, the centerpiece of these scams, which is the political establishment seem to think of these as crimes that don't have a victim, and therefore they can just essentially talk their way through it.
Before I come to you, Jayaprakash, I just want, because it's true that in private conversations, not just the victim aspect of it, but the policy aspect of it. Particularly with 2G and coal, with the mining scams, there is a much clearer sense of outrage and a much clearer equation of what the crime is. But I'd like you to define for us the difference between a policy measure that people don't agree with and the actual fact of corruption where, there is preference given to somebody or where the rules are bent, as did happen in 2G, with particular corporates and A-Raja. There were two aspects to that entire scam. There was a policy decision made by the government not to capitalize or to give away spectrum at a cheaper rate, whatever their thinking was. And then there was the bending of rules even within that, the advancing of the dates, the preference to certain corporate houses. That is a much clearer understanding. But what about policy decisions? And I think that has become a very complicated zone because...
Exactly.
So what was wrong with that?
I think yesterday there was this discussion between the two businessmen and the politician, and the Vikram attempted to ask this question in a slightly different way about public policy capture. And that really is the cornerstone of the strategy today. The way you game the system is not by saying, the conventional model of saying, here's a briefcase, Mr. Politician or Mr. Bureaucrat, give me something. It's not that anymore. It's not that simple or naive anymore. This is about saying there will be a public policy, a policy that will be couched in the most well-meaning phrases and phraseology of eradicating poverty and getting benefits to all common men, and then having at the heart of that public policy clear biases and let's say, weighted against some people that are built into the policy. Now, the problem here is there is hardly very much of a discussion within media or in civil society about public policy per se. What people catch on to is the extension of the cutoff date. What people catch on to is the tweaking of tender conditions. But when the government of India or a state government comes up with a public policy document, and that public policy is captured by the get-go, by, let's say, vested interests A, B, and C, that is where the current current trend of corruption emerges from.
Did you game the system when you yourself were starting out in your business? Is that not part of being an entrepreneur?
Look, I think this is I think you heard the business guys yesterday answer this. Where does this chicken and egg thing start? Is it the system that encourages the businessmen to game the system, or is it the businessmen who say, I will game the system and therefore that's how the system shall work? I mean, that is one of those 1,000 million billion dollar questions. But that, I think we shouldn't waste our time trying to figure out who's at fault, as much as saying there's something fundamentally dysfunctional and broken about how policies are made, who benefits from these policies, and whether these benefits are equitable, fair, transparent. And I think that's where the focus of the conversation should be.
JP, again, as I was saying, perhaps we should discuss corruption at two levels. One is at this level of policy, the other is on the ground, and we'll come to the ground corruptions later. Having defined that there is a new kind of white-collar crime, do you think that it's just separate from legitimate profit-making altogether? How is it? And then, what do you think are the ways in which we should be combating this? Was the idea of the Lokpal that Anna Hazare and Arvind Kejriwal, who is someone that you have supported, was that the correct way of going about it? Can we have one superstructure, magic wand that is going to sort this out?
Shoma, what Rajeev described is what we would call collusive corruption. As opposed to grassroots petty corruption to which we're all victims, extortionary corruption, where for something that's your entitlement, a birth certificate, a land record, registration of a property, a sale deed, or even a tax assessment, you have to pay a bribe. But this is collusive corruption where the bribe giver and the bribe taker both collude. They benefit at the cost of society. That's why it appears to be victimless, because the victim is the amorphous whole, and that's a problem. Undoubtedly, punishment is important, but that's the last thing. I'm all for Lokpal, Lokayukta, and 100 other institutions, but that's the last thing. First is, as far as practicable competition, Rajeev and I were co-petitioners. We went to Supreme Court asking the court to cancel the 2G spectrum. For the first time in India's history, 122 licenses were cancelled And the court gave a direction that in future, all natural resources should be allocated by competitive bidding. Ideally, that is the best thing. But sometimes competitive bidding may not be possible. After all, government may have legitimate reasons why there must be allocation of a resource to entrepreneurs on certain rational criteria. In which case, let there be something called windfall profit tax. Now, if somebody got an abnormal profit, not because of innovation or investment or skill or management, but because of monopoly control over the resources of the country, it happens sometimes, even in a legitimate transaction. Supposing suddenly the prices of petrol and oil shoot up globally, and you actually are in the exploration business, you may get abnormal profits, not because you're a sinner, but because you're lucky. Now, that luck at the cost of the country is not very right. Therefore, you must get a reasonable profit. The rest of it must flow back to the country in the form of windfall profit tax. The third way is to ensure that there is transparency in every one of these transactions. So there are answers. Take telephones, for instance. 15, 20 years ago, even members of this audience, if they wanted a telephone, it was hellish. I remember when I quit IAS to found a movement for democratic reform in India, I telephoned to a member of parliament because I leased out his son's property. His son was earlier a tenant there. The telephones were still retained. His business failed. So I had to ring up a member of parliament to say, look, you have an MP's quota to get a telephone. I don't know how many people remember that there was an MP's quota for telephones.
Correct.
And will you therefore please retain this telephone here, and I will pay you whatever the costs, and you can get an MP's quota. He could not oblige me. That's a different matter. But the point is, after 16 years in the administrative service, after a considerable amount of clout in my home state and some public recognition, I had to beg somebody for a telephone connection. Today, there's not one in India out of 1 billion telephone connections who had to bribe or beg. So where there is competition and technology, suddenly corruption has come down. If corruption is continuing in some sectors, it's because reform has not taken place. There is a perception in some other media in the country that reform is the cause of corruption. There's nothing farther from truth. Reform, wherever it really happened, true reform, actually it brought down corruption. Because monopolies and state control are continued, corruption continues. The challenge is how to break that. After having said all these things, and of course decentralization of power, as far as practicable, try and decentralize, localize, delegate so that people know the link between the taxes and services, what's happening to my money, and it becomes much more vocal. Otherwise, victimless corruption continues. People think it's not my problem. Once I see it's my problem, I am the loser, this money could have been put to use for my benefit and it's going to somebody's pockets, then I am going to be a partner in this fight. There are some innovative tools like, for instance, in the United States, you have what is called False Claims Act. Any citizen can fight a litigation and say, look, so-and-so, Jayaprakash, he's a supplier to the government because of the price gouging, because he cheated the system. He is charging more than what the market would have charged. And therefore, there's a loss sustained. If that person proves it in a court of law, the court in a summary trial can impose a penalty up to 5 times the loss sustained. And the fellow who went to court, he will get 10-15% of the share. So you actually incentivize citizens' fight. And finally, certainly, you have to punish. Now, let me give you one illustration. Rod Blagojevich, I don't know how many people remember, this chap was governor of Illinois State when Barack Obama was elected president. He was earlier senator from Illinois, if you remember Obama. Now, all this fellow did was something very simple and silly by Indian standards. Rajeev and others would be laughing at it. He had the power to appoint the senator in the interim before the next election. What he did was simply bargain for $100,000, not even a bribe, but funding to his election campaign by check. $100,000, even by Indian standards, is peanuts to appoint a member of parliament. Now, a senator in the United States is really a mighty legislative figure. That's what he bargained for. He didn't even get the money. What happened? He lost the office, the governor of one of the biggest states of the United States. He was jailed recently for 14 years. His family is on the streets, and financially is bankrupt. Now, that kind of swift and sure justice, where you not only lose your liberty, but also your property. And in India, believe me, property works.
Matters more than liberty.
It matters, because I don't think people really care if they're in jail for a few years. Because my giving property to my children is the most important. That's necessary. But I cannot overemphasize the fact that what's important really is to create conditions where that's no longer necessary to actually be corrupt or possible to be corrupt. Because you cannot punish 1 billion people. You have to have that as a last resort. Unfortunately, in this whole debate in the country, there's a perception that there is a panacea. There's one great monolithic institution that will transform India tomorrow. But the problem is, who will police the police?
No, absolutely. That's why so many have resisted the formulation of the Lokpal bill. Just one more before I come back to Rajeev, Jayaprakash, that this issue of auction itself is a complicated one. The baseline entry may become more fair and transparent. But we've also had cases in India where, and they're still going on, where even after something has been auctioned, the terms of that contract can change, what constitutes profit, what will go to the government, what will not. How have other countries come to situations where all of this gets solidified in better ways? You can still game the system even after something has been auctioned.
Shoma, if somebody is determined to make money in public office, no matter how many barriers you create, how many laws you make, there are always ways of making it happen. Ultimately, there are two things. One is, you must enhance the credibility of the system. You must ensure swift and sure punishment in case of wrongdoing. You cannot really anticipate all contingencies in the world. And the second is, you must create a political system that lends itself less to corruption. Let me be brutally honest. Rajeev is in the upper house of the parliament. I've been elected to the lower house. I know what electoral politics are. I entered it not because I love to be elected, because I know it's terrible, it's disgraceful, but the kind of people that ought to be in public office are now shunning it. The political system is completely hostile to the Tilaks and the Gokhales and the Gandhis and the Ambedkars and the Nehrus and the Maulana Azads and the Sarojini Naidus. And it's only the sons and daughters of politicians because of pedigree. Some 70 to 80% of all younger members of parliament are essentially sons and daughters of politicians, or very big money, unprecedentedly large amounts of money, even by global standards, or criminals, all kinds of things. This is not the right way. Barack Obama and Cameron, both 7, 8 years ago, were unknown virtually in their countries. But they could easily rise to the top of their political parties and the nation because they were competent and the system allowed a new entrant to become a leader with new ideas. In India, it's impossible. Unless you transform the political system, and unless you create conditions hospitable to the best and the brightest, unless you create conditions where honesty and survival in public office are compatible, and believe me, in India today, even if you're individually honest, increasingly honesty and survival in public office are incompatible. Therefore, the politician is actually a victim of a vicious cycle. I know I'm saying something unpopular, something that's counterintuitive. We all love to hate our politicians, and who doesn't, anywhere in a democratic world. But there's something much deeper. Let me just say quickly, there are 3 big problems. The best are not entering. If they enter, they're rejected, ejected, humiliated in no time. They only have to go to the upper house if the parties favor them. 2, money power is playing havoc. Take my home state of Andhra Pradesh. To get elected to the state legislature, 5 crores is the norm for an average candidate. I am the only exception in the whole state of Andhra Pradesh where a fellow spent only 4 lakh rupees to get elected. It's unthinkable. It's unthinkable in today's India. Much of it. Even in Kashmir, I'm told yesterday, one of your colleagues from Kashmir, Omar, was telling me, even in Kashmir, they spent 500 rupees per vote per party and 300 rupees another party. I'm shocked that even in Kashmir it is happening. So money power of this kind, if you think after that there is no corruption, it's absurd. The third thing is the great national parties of this country. I'm not an admirer of them, Congress or BJP, but we need national parties to retain the idea of India. This very complex, this diverse, this wonderful nation of ours cannot be sustained by excessive parochialism and narrow-minded thinking. And the national parties are losing out. UP, Bihar, you take Bengal, you take Tamil Nadu, you take increasingly Andhra Pradesh, and even Maharashtra. The national parties are getting elbowed out. In 290 out of the 542 parliamentary constituencies, the national parties are practically marginal. It's a very unwholesome situation. We must switch over to a better system like proportional representation, where the marginal vote is not all important. Ethical politics is sustainable. A decent person can actually get in and be elected. The bar is not very high, but we must have some safeguards to ensure that narrow-minded politics do not really gain dominance. There are methods. It's a technical issue. But the point is, there are institutional answers. Don't simply blame these fellows. The easiest thing is all politicians are rascals, all bureaucrats are corrupt, all judges are useless. Then who is useful in this country, pray tell me? It's absurd to think that all of us are wonderful and all of them are bad.
I couldn't agree with you more, and one has been in this very uncomfortable position of suddenly standing up for the establishment, which is really...
No, we are the establishment. All of us are the establishment,
Yeah,
like
no,
it or not.
And for a country like India, the most important thing is politics, so to outlaw politics is suicidal.
Absolutely.
Again, before I come to Rajeev, you've already created, and so have others, a blueprint for electoral reform. And I asked Manish that yesterday, and he didn't quite answer it. Why is there such resistance from the political system to electoral reform?
I don't think there's resistance. I think there's inertia, really. Party management is so incredibly complex, so innervating, so exhausting in the country. It is made worse because these fellows want to hold on to that control. Instead of making it a democratic party where everybody is bearing the burden, it's all Sonia Gandhi's burden, L.K. Advani's burden, Chandrababu Naidu's burden, or Shiv Sena boss's burden, or somebody else's burden. And once you have that, you have this whole palace intrigues, this whole insecurity, this fear of losing control, and you think that you're actually in control, you become a slave. And in order to ensure that your son or daughter is the successor, you are really undermining yourself, your authority, and of course the nation's future. If you make the parties democratic, it's easier. And secondly, oftentimes, the parties don't even have the time and energy to understand what is in their best interest. All they look at is what's in front of their noses today, this election, somehow getting a few more seats, somehow buying a few more fellows in parliament or assembly, somehow being in office today. What for? We forget. No, Einstein said, 20th century is characterized by perfection of means and confusion of ends. And I think our politicians are a classic illustration of that.
Okay.
Shoma, can I answer that question? I want to answer that as well.
Yeah, sure.
Because I don't quite agree with JP on this. I don't think this is inertia. Look, there is a fundamental dichotomy that if you want to change the system, the people who have to change it are the people within the system. That is how the parliament works. So if you want electoral reforms and you want legislative reforms, unfortunately, the reality is these 542 wise men in parliament have to get together and agree that there has to be a change. And
I think there's some, although yesterday I was accused of having too much feminism in the program, but
yeah, men and women,
men and
sorry,
women.
politically correct. The point here is, your topic is where are we today and are the winds of change blowing? And if you take a report card or a scorecard of where we are on this battle of governance reforms, you will find that, and from the admission of Praful yesterday and the two businessmen, we've actually arrived at a very interesting inflection point where there is an admission by the political system that there is something wrong. And they are now saying, please give us solutions. Praful actually sat here and said, we don't know what the solution is, please give us a solution other than Lokpal. And the two businessmen, the big businessmen said, we are actually looking for reducing the discretion and unfettered power within politicians. The real core of the issue is, the political class today in India believe that they have a God-given or an electoral-given right for 5 years to do what they want to do. They don't believe in these checks and balances. So respectfully, I would disagree with JP and say this is not about inertia. There is a deep-rooted reluctance to make any of these fundamental changes in the way government functions, whether it is about disclosures, whether it is about accountability, whether it's about financial oversight. There is an allergy to it. And the question that we should be asking ourselves is, how do we bring that reluctant change? Because the people who are supposed to change are going to fight this tooth and nail. Let there be no amount of moralizing, no amount of talking about the Bhagavad Gita or the ethics or Ramayana or the good guys will win, will change the system unless there are, and that why is Anna Hazare and Arvind Kejriwal's movement so relevant in the history of this movement? It is because they have come in from the outside and changed the discourse from governance reforms, which is a discussion that makes everybody go to sleep. And I've tried this in many, many forums. You talk about governance reforms and people's eyes glaze over. But when you talk about corruption, people are, enraged and they are, repulsed. You sort of create an emotive reaction from people. So this issue that the political class believes that they are only accountable once in 5 years has to be changed, and that can only happen through legislative changes, legal ways of right to recall, having better financial oversight, more disclosures in government contracting and government public asset management. And these are things that this political class will not do themselves. So the real debating issue is how do we get that to happen?
Rajeev, I think it's a terrible construct to have, to believe that you need legislative reform that can't be done by the legislative house, you know.
But they are not. But they are not. I'm only going by, I'm not saying that they will not. I'm saying they are not. I think everybody realizes today what we need to have a better form of government. I don't agree with Praful's contention that we don't know what the answers are. I think everybody today who's a student of government and who's a student of governance understands what needs to be done to bring in more disclosure. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was saying, Rajeev, to come to the Anna movement, because they've done a very good thing by bringing attention to corruption. But I think we are at that tipping point where if you don't turn that into a productive environment rather than just a witch-hunting carnival, we will lose this moment in history, you know, because there is one to have a public catharsis with no introspection, and quite something else to, you know, to chip away at the structures of democracy that will bring us to a safer place, you know. And I think we're at that moment where none of us are interested in the chipping of it. So to come back to that, you know, in the last 2 years, even this government that we have been maligning so much has done two things which are interesting. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh talked of collusive corruption where both the bribe giver and the bribe taker should be punished. This audience, you know, the television watching audience, and I've been on television shows where everybody laughed at that, you know. They said, oh, it'll never happen. They've also tried to remove discretionary powers of MPs and MLAs and ministers. That was laughed at. How do we break out of a society where we just assume that the other person's not going to do something right? And you are sitting in parliament, you're a businessman yourself. Why don't those rules apply to yourself? You know?
No, so my point is not that we are assuming that nothing will happen. I am inferring from what is happening. I'm not sitting on a pedestal and passing judgment on people. It's not that. This discussion on the need for governance reforms is not something that is coterminous with Kejriwal and Anna Hazare. This is a discussion that's been going on for many years before. My point is that there has been no action or no incentive on part of the political class to affect this change unless there is a gun to the head. I'm sorry to use this metaphor, but there is, I'm a believer, and we may disagree, that's fine. I mean, you know, we can agree to disagree. I don't think we have to all agree. Is that there is an inherent conflict of interest within the political class to give up what they believe is the right to control and power. And to wean them away from that little addictive feeling of complete power that is given to them once in 5 years, there has to be some reform in the way parliament functions and the way we relate to our member of parliament or our MLA. There has to be a relationship of accountability between the elected representative and the people that elect him. Not once in 5 years, but on an everyday basis.
I completely agree with you, Rajeev. We're going to run out of time. Give me just one small step, because you know, one has a suspicion of the large vaccine that one size fits all. One small step that you think can be done in the immediate future.
No, I think, for example, I can't do a soundbite on this, but give me a minute and a half. We are going to spend as a nation, the government of India is going to spend in the next 5 years, in the 12th plan, $1 trillion. Now, nobody in this audience, or you or me, let's assume we are the most optimistic people about our parliamentary system and our government, believes that $1 trillion of taxpayer money is going to be spent honestly and transparently. We don't believe that. So if we don't go in there and make some of these systemic changes, whether it's right to recall your MP, or an MLA, there has to be some pressure on the elected representative to perform the right way. I don't believe in sermonizing will fix and will in some sense illuminate the wisdom of our elected representative to do the right thing. It has not happened in the last 65 years. Why will it happen in the next 5 years? So I believe that there are some things like the right to recall. There is going to have to be better financial oversight of the government by parliament and parliamentary committees. There has to be institution building like the CAG and the Supreme Court, and there has to be other institutions that play the system of checks and balances on government. Questions will need to be asked and answers will need to be given without it making it ego between government and another institution. So this is what we need. And of course, we need media. And I'm worried that the corporatization of media will make the last little pillar of our democracy also disappear. So we need all of that.
JP, I can't flout my own rules. Yesterday I did that and created chaos, so I will have to leave this here. I think, Rajeev has spoken of a lot of important things, so has JP. The first one could possibly be about creating transparency, of just having speaking orders, of leaving a trail of why decision-making in a country like ours is extremely complex. One sometimes worries that we are making it almost impossible for leaders to take decisions that are not immediately suspect. So maybe we need to leave a trail of why we take decisions, why discretion is exercised. And to my mind, maybe just bringing a couple of words back into our discourse, which is the idea of propriety. I mean, big crimes would not happen if at the very basis we began to understand that there is public propriety of how we speak and how we act. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks.